Task Force will come to order. I would like to introduce the witnesses for our second panel. First, we have Representative Eli Crane from Arizona. Rep. Crane enlisted into the Navy to serve our country just a week after the September 11th attacks. 3 out of his 5 wartime deployments were with the Navy SEALs. It's great to have you here, Rep. Crane. Second, we have Representative Corey Mills from Florida. Rep. Mills enlisted in the Army at a young age, serving with the 82nd Airborne Division and Joint Special Operations Command. Both of these men have extensive experience as snipers in our military. They have both visited the site in Butler, where the former president was nearly killed, and have identified potential ways for Secret Service to improve their protection. It's important for the task force to hear from these snipers and learn from their experience, better understand how the Secret Service missed on these key areas of coverage. This is a particularly important, given the fact that former President Trump will be returning to the same site to finish his speech on October the 5th. I talked to both Corey and Eli before this. Rarely in your life do you have a second time to do the right thing after you messed up the first time. Now, this panel will be different than the last. Both of witnesses will be allotted 5 minutes for remarks, and then we will gavel out. I want to now recognize Representative Crane for 5 minutes. Representative, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today as you conduct this very critical hearing. For those of you who don't know, I served in the U.S. Navy from 2001 to 2014, had the opportunity to deploy to Iraq multiple times with SEAL Team 3. One of my qualifications was as a sniper. We are highly trained in various aspects of military operation, weaponry, technology, tactics, and all sorts of mission sets to include executive protection. With that background, it's evident to me that many basic security measures were completely dropped. That being said, you do not have to have a background in special operations to recognize the incompetence and security failures that led to the catastrophic vulnerabilities surrounding President Trump and the crowd that day. I hear from Americans every day in complete disbelief in the wake of 2 assassination attempts in 2.5 months that cannot believe how ineffective our Secret Service has become. There's simply no excuse. I'm glad I can testify today to share some insight into the operational failures of that fateful day. Rep. Mills and I visited Butler, Pennsylvania rally site immediately following the assassination attempt to investigate. I've also visited the site with Homeland Security Chairman Mark Green and my colleagues on the committee. Some of the main challenges facing Secret Service were completely avoidable. For example, we investigated the second floor window. Secret Service agents and local law enforcement had access to overlooking the roof from where the shooter engaged the former president. I was able to confirm that had anyone stationed in the second story at AGR building come off of their weapon system, moved to the window, and looked out the window during their search to reacquire Thomas Crooks, they would have seen him within 30 to 40 yards of that position. He would have easily been spotted lying on that roof with no camouflage and his rifle. We were able to confirm that former Secret Service Director Cheadle was lying to Congress when she gave us the excuse that the roof was too slanted, too dangerous for Secret Service snipers to take up counter-sniper positions. But as myself and others who went up on that roof, it was not steep at all. Ironically, the positions that Secret Service counter-snipers posted themselves upon were actually far steeper than that roof at the AGR building. Furthermore, Secret Service did not have any of its counter-snipers on a nearby water tower, the tallest structure at the farm show grounds. I knew immediately upon setting foot at that site, and Mr. Chairman, you were there as well, that that's exactly where I would have placed myself as a counter-sniper because of its commanding view over the entire property. Not only would any counter-sniper have been able to easily engage Thomas Crooks from that position that he attempted to assassinate former President Trump, but it is very likely that Thomas Crooks might have decided to abort his mission and go home had we had counter-snipers on that water tower. The thing that we need to understand about security is how important deterrence is. Had Thomas Crooks visually spotted or located counter-snipers with the use of his drone that day, it is very likely that he would recognize that he would have been deterred long before ever getting into that position capable of having a direct line of sight to the podium and to President Trump, and would have possibly aborted his mission. Rep. Mills and I also ranged several other buildings and windows that were well within range for anyone with the desire to assassinate the former president. Upon our investigation that day, we were informed that nobody was posted on nor had conducted any advanced work amongst these very choice and accessible firing positions. Rep. Mills and I both concluded within minutes of observation from the same exact positions used by Secret Service counter snipers that this was a horrible venue for a rally, and Secret Service should have done everything possible to dissuade the campaign from hosting it there. To date, we have seen no evidence that Secret Service tried to dissuade the campaign from using the site due to the alarming threat profiles surrounding the site. Though I appreciate the former president's courage and strong desire to rally his supporters, I strongly suggest that he and his campaign avoid this site on October 5th and in the future, which leads me to my most concerning assessment now of both assassination attempts on the former president. I cannot be more clear. To this point, we have been extremely lucky. Whether either of these individuals were working in coordination with other groups, organizations, or nation states who desired to kill the former president, none of the individuals attempting to kill the president have been professionals. I can tell you that with authority by the weaponry and the gear they used, as well as the fact that Thomas Crooks took a headshot. I can tell you from experience that most snipers are trained to take center mass torso shots, if possible, for the very exact reason that we saw him miss a headshot on July 13th. I can also tell by examining Ryan Ruth's final firing position on the fence line of the golf course that he too was not a professional. No trained sniper, no trained assassin would have set up their final firing position the way he did. We are trained to make absolute sure that nothing on our person or in the vicinity of where we are located and going to take our final shots, that anything stands out from the environment we are in. You could see those large bags holding ballistic plates on the fence, which would easily catch the eye of any trained security agent. He also stuck his barrel through the fence instead of cutting what we call a loophole in it so that he could stay back in the shadows, allowing his concealment. I want to reiterate, to date, these individuals that have tried to assassinate former President Trump are not professionals. What is going to happen, Mr. Chairman, when the president of Iran, China, Russia, or any other country or group who does not want to see President Trump come back into office send professionals? What is going to happen next time if there is a 10-man Hezbollah team, snipers, assaulters, and drone operators launching coordinated and overlapping assassination attempt on the president? I think we can all see by now that their likelihood of success would be tremendous. My suggestion to the former president and to his campaign is that he beef up his private security detail of individuals who are loyal to him and not burdened by the bureaucracy and culture of an organization that many of us used to hold in very high esteem. The reason for this is so they can plug holes that Secret Service continues to leave and make sure they are not putting him in vulnerable situations. It is important that these investigations and oversight continue to make sure that in the coming days, weeks, and months, and even years, this is no longer a regular occurrence and not even a possibility. I want to challenge this task force to continue doing the great work that they are doing here today, and I also want to challenge them to have enough courage to think outside the box, challenge the mainstream narratives, and be willing to investigate every theory regardless of how conspiratorial others might claim them to be. There is a concern from the American people that this task force will be like most investigations in Washington, D.C. that lead to zero accountability and transparency and simply call for money for an organization that desperately needs reforms at its core. I'd like to again thank the chairman and my colleagues on this task force who are doing great work and the witnesses giving their time and knowledge to help uncover the truth and bring all facts to light.
Thank you, Mr. Crane. I tell you, we accept the challenge. When we're done with this, the American people are going to have faith and trust and faith in everything that we've done, the confidence that we did what we were supposed to do, what we were tasked to do. So I thank you so much for being here. You all have kept that standard up. Now recognize Representative Mills.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to first take a moment just to correct the record that my actual time as a designated defensive marksman and counter sniper was as a contractor of the U.S. State Department on a protective detail, not as a military sniper. While I was honored to serve as a combat veteran with the 82nd Airborne Division, I don't hold that permissibility in that billet. I want to talk today a little bit about what took place, but also what I see as the actual perimeter failures that has continued to be a reoccurring issue, whether that be in Butler, PA, or whether it be the most recent assassination attempt in Florida. But before I do that, I also want to take a moment just to recognize the loss of Corey Competore. His family deserves to continue to have the accountability research and also investigation into what actually caused the death of a father, a husband, and a family member. My thoughts and prayers remain with Corey Competore's family. I also want to look at what our findings have been, as both myself and my colleague and really close friend, Rep. Crane, has found. It is clear that Butler County, PA, as well as for the ESU teams and the Secret Service, had a failure in their overall coordination. That the perimeter establishment and the actual ownership belongs to that of the Secret Service, as well as for the failures on that day of July 13th in Butler, PA. We realize, as it's been mentioned earlier, that there was a breakdown in not only the misuse of any compatible communication capabilities, but also a lack of a joint operations center that could have allowed for each of the individual units to be able to communicate in a more efficient fashion that would have led to a faster response element. We also know that while there could have been potential drone capabilities that was being utilized, that the Secret Service themselves had actually refused to utilize those for their benefit, which also could have helped the counter-snipers who were sitting in their positions. There was also a lack of coordination when it came to who was actually going to take over the position on the AGR building, where Butler understood the idea that it was the Secret Service who was responsible for the positioning, but yet the Secret Service failed to actually show up to the morning coordination meeting. While all of these repeated perimeter failures, whether it be the 150-meter shot that was taken by Thomas Crooks or the potential assailant that was looking at a 500-yard distance from Florida, the thing that we've established is that no one is looking at what is happening and going on with regards to the Secret Service's cultural issues. This is not a budgetary issue, and I want it to be clear that we cannot treat this as DC has continued to treat things, where we throw money at problems in hopes that it's actually going to cause that to be a solution. This breaks it down into three simple things. One is poor leadership of the United States Secret Service, whether that be under Director Cheadle or whether that be under Rowe. To quote Dan Bongino, who is actually a former Secret Service agent, he said that he does not feel any safer or better now than he did under Cheadle, having Rowe at the helm. I think leadership, as we can all admit to, whether it be in the military, the police force, or whether it be here in the House, leadership is one of the things that we must rely upon heavily, and there is a crisis in leadership. I also want to look at the fact that there is a prioritization across not just our military, but other departments and agencies to prioritize diversity, equity, inclusion under DEI, the meritocracy and readiness of our actual capabilities on the ground. But the further thing that I think is needing to be explored is the doctrine itself that is being utilized by the U.S. Secret Service. For too long, they've continued to go under a very specific and very understandable thing where whatever your title is that you hold results in the amount of resources and assets that are being allocated. This is a failure by any of us who understand security, or anyone who's even got a basic knowledge of security, that you must conduct the necessary threat analysis to determine the risk management matrix that then determines what the assets and resources that should be allocated. This is not as simple as saying that you're a former president and therefore there is a one-size-fits-all for Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton, President Bush, or former President Donald J. Trump. We must acknowledge the fact that what we're looking at now is also the fact that so much time has passed and so much of the actual potential evidence has been destroyed or put away, that purposeful intent is now indistinguishable from criminal negligence. Having laid in the actual position where Thomas Crooks took the shot above and upon the AGR building, as well as having sat with Rep. Crane and ranged the position from the counter sniper teams where the alleged shot was taking place, this is something that should have been preventable and should have been known to the counter sniper teams. I want to also point out the fact that, as Rep. Crane discussed, I think that until the actual problem and the solution can be found for the Secret Service with the three key areas that I've talked about, that a private security detail who does not have any political agenda or affiliation to protect the president is what my recommendation would be to ensure that the inner core is basically protected at all times, utilizing his available Secret Service assets and resources to be pushed out further to allow that perimeter failure to be completed. I want to thank the task force for giving me the opportunity to actually testify before you. And I want to point out that when we're looking at the map that's behind you, Mr. Chairman, that it is not just the AGR building 150 yards away approximately that was the issue. But even if you look directly to the 12 o'clock of the stage, you have the Kubota dealership, which is only within about a 400-yard shot placement, which Rep. Crane and many snipers and counter snipers can tell you is a very feasible shot. When speaking to the Kubota dealer, we noted the fact that not a single Secret Service or local law enforcement agent had ever talked to that dealership to ask them whether or not they could put any snipers on the rooftop or whether or not they could actually utilize that as an overwatch position. If you look to what would be from my vantage point right now, which is the 3 o'clock, which would be the 9 o'clock for the president, that was the area that was actually the third counter sniper team that one of our whistleblowers, Ben Schaefer, had talked about from his vantage point and being able to see Thomas Crooks at an earlier time. Mr. Chairman, I point these things out to the committee, and again, to echo my good friend Representative Crane, I challenge you to continue to go forward and to not be feared away from the idea of being labeled a conspiracist by looking into every possible outcome, being able to look at every possible provided video, listen to every single testimony of each individual whistleblower. But I also pledge my continued support for the task force, as does Rep. Crane, to provide information, intel, and any of our findings to help further this investigation. While it is an independent investigation, I want you to know that it is not exclusive of the efforts in which you are taking and that we are here to work together to try and find a solution to improve our Secret Service and to guarantee the protection of not just President Donald J. Trump, but any of the actual nominees on either side of the aisle. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
I want to thank you both. Now, we have put the picture of that whole area. One of the recurring questions was the perimeter where it should be? Now, you two were both there. I know you were both up on the roof of AGR. I've been in constant conversation with the people who run the AGR. They didn't know on July 13th that their whole area was something that was going to be just overrun with people. So the question was, and to me it's always the same thing, every time there's a failure you look at, it's the failure to prepare that causes the failure, ultimately. You two, with your expertise and having been there and both being on that roof, when I first walked on when I first walked on the grounds, but whenever Eli and I walked on the grounds when Homeland was there, the first thing Eli said to me as we started to go across the open area is, who was in the water tower? What sniper was in the water tower? And I said, you know what, I have no idea that there was anybody in the water tower. As you've pointed out, and I've heard too many times, that the reason we didn't have people on the roof of the AGR, it was too hot that day. Well, it wasn't too hot for Thomas Crooks. The fact that we weren't there allowed him to be there. Now, as I said earlier when we opened the whole conversation, we are going to have a second chance to do the right thing and correct the failures of July 13th. The president has decided that he is going back to this site. And I think we know him well enough. He defies any type of logic when it comes to, sir, we're concerned about your safety. And his answer is always the same thing. I'm committed to serving the people of this country. Nobody puts themselves in that position that I've ever been around before. You all served that way, but to me it's astounding that this gentleman is ready to go back to a place where he almost lost his life. I don't think my wife would allow me to do that. Apparently his family, and they've gone through a lot, are going forward with this. But I want you to, because of your expertise, because Eli was the first one to say that. Who was on the water tower? Where was the perimeter? Who tried to put that whole game together? And we found from our first panel today, there was very little coordination. They couldn't talk to each other. They didn't have the ability to communicate. So from the standpoint that you've all been in and looking at where we are, and so everybody understands this as I look at this. This is the AGR building. The water tower is right here. The president was down here. So Where should the perimeter have been? Because apparently they thought it was here. That's what was set up, because we had people in this area. We didn't have anybody back here, not from Secret Service. We did have private law enforcement. This whole area was under construction. There was no easy way in or easy way out of this site. On that day, everything that could go wrong apparently went wrong. Going forward, October 5th, where should the perimeter be?
Mr. Chairman, I'll tell you that any counter sniper, or anyone from the military can tell you that the high ground and the highest vantage point is where you want to be. The thing that Eli and I had talked about, Representative Crane, when we looked at the water tower, we actually walked over and tried to view whether or not it was even accessible to begin with. But what I had also noticed is that right behind the water tower was a very well manicured cut path that goes through the woods all the way down to the intersection that intersects between where the entrance to the fairground was and the AGR building's main street. Very permissible without any magnetometers or any of the actual capabilities of security that would have actually allowed someone to go in there basically unfettered. In my personal opinion, when you establish the perimeter, you look at what actual risks exist. The Kubota dealership is obviously somewhere that I would have actually had someone stationed to ensure they couldn't access the building. The AGR building would have been a vantage point that I would certainly have looked at 150 yards. Also, to the 9 o'clock of the stage, there was a tremendous amount of multiple buildings and structures who also had a vantage point, direct line of sight to the stage itself. But you would have essentially have looked at what are the actual capabilities of a professional shooter. And I want to echo one thing, if I may, Mr. Chairman, by Representative Crane. When we talk about the fact that not even the risk of an actual trained sniper or someone who has an understanding of long-range distance shooting, but an actual assault team who could have very easily, that fence line that you're pointing at for the AGR building is approximately 100 yards direct line of sight to the stage with no blockage in either the visual or any additional security with an actual screening or anything like that. So you could have had a guy walk up, or a team of individuals, with a bag with an assault rifle or other capabilities who could have easily have come to that line. And Eli and I have discussed this with also Eric Prince. They could have basically done a 5-man, 7-man, 10-man line right there to have opened fire with assault weapons and created a kill box right there on top of that stage. And you're talking 100 yards. That's what most people utilize as their original dope, which is their original 0 for their rifles. So very capable for almost any rifle. And you actually have some special operations teams who do very well with a pistol at even 100. So the fact is that all of the AGR building should have been secured. They should have had full-time watch on that road that leads into the AGR building, which, as you know, comes into the main area and then loops around to a back parking lot. I would have had a law enforcement officer, a Secret Service agent, checking every single person who was parking there to ensure that they were an employee of AGR and not like the white van or others who were able to be permitted into there with complete access, not knowing what was capable. But also, let's note one thing that we haven't mentioned here, which is these sophisticated explosive devices that was also found. This is what also Representative Crane and I talked about was problematic, because even some of the EOD teams talked about the sophistication of this device, which makes me also look further into the fact that Thomas Crooks was not acting alone. And a multi-channel detonator or transmitter is a pretty sophisticated thing that you don't just go ahead and find online. So there's more that needs to be uncovered, but I would tell you without unequivocally, and I'll let my colleague also determine whether he feels the same, the entire AGR perimeter, a positioning at the Kubota dealership to the 12 o'clock of the stage, as well as for the outlying buildings to the 9 o'clock of the stage, which were multiple buildings, should have all been covered and should have all have ensured that there was no advantage point to get to the president for line of sight.
Mr. Crane, any additional?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think one of the things that I said in my opening statement needs to be said again. When you look at this site and all the threat profiles that surround this site, sir, I don't think the event should have ever been held there. There's just way too many buildings, rooftops, windows, trees that a potential assassin could have posted themselves up in. So I think that's number one. As far as when you talk about some of your more conventional assassination attempts with long-range rifles, most of your snipers, counter snipers who have any legitimate training whatsoever are more than capable out far past 1,000 yards. But let's just say we put that perimeter at 1,000 yards. That's one thing to consider. But the other thing I think that's important to point out, sir, is that modern warfare has changed dramatically, and we need look no further than some of the warfare going on with Ukraine and Russia right now. One of the biggest threats to the president, and this is why I keep talking about the fact that nobody that has attempted to assassinate the president has been a professional. But with drone warfare, sir, attacks could be launched at any president, any candidate from miles away. And if we can't stop a 20-year-old kid with no military experience who gets within 150 yards of the president with an AR-15 and then gets off several shots at the president, I have very little faith that we'd be able to stop a coordinated drone attack along with assault teams and snipers. And so that's one of the things that I want to continue to harp on. One of the things Dan Bongino told us, Mr. Chairman, is that the Secret Service, while he was there, was allergic to innovation. They were allergic to, any attempt to keep, their security systems appropriate and relative to the threats that modern warfare present. Dan Bongino even said that it took them decades, sir, to even start using slings on their primary weapons. Anybody who's ever, been in law enforcement on a SWAT team or in the military that has a primary and a secondary weapon knows that if you don't have a sling, sir, and you have to transition to your secondary weapon, what are you going to do with that gun? You're just going to throw it on the ground or give it to somebody? What if you have to climb a ladder? What if you have to do prisoner handling? And so if it took the Secret Service decades to even implement such basic, gear transformations, it's very concerning that they're going to be able to handle some of these modern threats that are now very likely as modern warfare has adapted.
No, thank you. I'm aware of this whole area for trying to figure out where I am in life. About 60-some years, I know this area. As you just pointed out, and we've talked about before, one of my main concerns when I found out this was going to be the place, I said, this is going to be almost impossible for safety and security. At this moment, though, I want to turn around and have Ms. Laura Lee, why don't you take 5 minutes to ask our panel the questions you want to ask? What?
Well, I just want to thank you both so much for being here. Your unique backgrounds and your insight about this subject matter is very valuable to us, and I appreciate you taking the time to participate in our hearing. I know you both have had an opportunity to cover in your statements some of the key things that you think are important for both the public and the committee to understand about the incident in Butler. Are there other things in particular areas of inquiry that you want to see this committee utilizing going forward, particular witnesses you think that we should have? Any thoughts you have about what and whom we should be bringing in to testify?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've seen online, and let me be clear when I say this, guys, so much of any investigation, I think, needs to be open-minded and willing to look at anything and everything that, even if it might be outside the official narrative. Even if you talk to somebody and find out that the evidence that they're presenting, might not hold water, might lack credibility, I think that's extremely important. One of the videos that I've seen online is from a gentleman named John Colin, who talks about the possibility of a second shooter, and he shows a video, Ms. Lee, where in this video he shows a bullet traveling down a path and the disruption that round supposedly makes, and then flies into one of the stadium fence railings. That shows that it would have been very, very difficult for that round to travel the path that it did had it come from Thomas Crooks. I think that you need to bring this gentleman in, see his evidence, and if you don't think it holds water, then you need to make that assessment. But that was one of the things I said in my opening testimony. Far too often, especially as representatives, we're scared that if we investigate something that others are saying might be conspiratorial, then that might defame us or give us a lack of credibility. But I think any investigation out there that's worth its salt will look at any theory and then try and disprove, debunk it, or see if it holds water and run with it. So John Cullen is somebody I think you guys should bring in here and look at the video evidence that he has of a bullet traveling, in a trajectory, in a path that would not have been able to come from Thomas Crooks.
And I'd like to just echo this. The one thing that doesn't lie is bullet trajectory and also the coefficients that it carries. And I think that Eli and I had talked about this prior to the hearing, but also multiple times about John Cullen's video that does show, if you look at people who were injured and the actual line of sight and where it was to the stage, just kind of what the possibilities were and how many shots were truly taken. The other thing that I would like us to continue to look at within this committee is that what are the overall, while we can try and talk about threat analysis, what are the things, and as Representative Crane had pointed out, even drone capabilities, knowing how sophisticated things have gotten, what are we missing with regards to risk management and mitigation strategies that exist now that didn't exist 20, 30 years ago, where they've not updated their training platform and portfolio to incorporate? What type of counter-drone capabilities do we have? What do we have as far as an understanding of what types of things we can enact immediately to try and get an improvement upon perimeter security layouts? And also even our communication capabilities. We found that even the counter-snipers were utilizing text messaging as one of the means of communication, knowing that, Eli and I can tell you, you have to come off the rifle or come off the scope if you're a spotter in order to try and text someone information and details. When they tried to say that we may not have had any type of good Wi-Fi or comms or internet, the Starlink system that we utilize in Ukraine and other areas has been proven to be something that can not only be set up immediately, but could be utilized and incorporated into the team's overall equipments. And so I think that, as Eli Crane talked about, as Dan Bongino's talked about, a lack of willingness of the Secret Service to evolve to the incoming threats, a lack of willingness to have new equipment that is the most modern, updated, and efficient, I think is going to lead to further attacks. But we also have to start looking at the adversarial challenges when it comes to Iran, who, as you know, the Ayatollah himself recently just posted a video that was alluding to the fact that they want to try another assassination, saying that revenge is imminent, even showing the Mar-a-Lago estates and the president playing golf. We need to take these threats very seriously, especially when we look at things like Mershan, who's the 46-year-old Pakistani who flew to Iran for a series of days, then to Houston, Texas, was stopped in Houston, Texas, and questioned by the FBI. And again, this is something I would ask the committee, and I know the FBI has been stonewalling and preventing information, but potentially subpoena and possible contempt. We have to acknowledge the fact, what was the actual answers that this individual provided, knowing he was already on a terrorist watch list, knowing that he just came from Iran, that would allow him to be permitted to enter into the United States and then found with a plot to not only assassinate the president, but also 35 other elected officials. I think that this is really getting to the crux of the fact that we don't have the security, and there's a false sense of security that's been developed at this point.
Well, thank you both. I certainly appreciate your thoughts and perspective, and can certainly attest that both myself and the chairman and all of the other members of the committee are committed to ensuring that we review and investigate all of the relevant theories, that we're receiving input from members of Congress, from the American public, as well as those who were there, who are the actual day of witnesses of these events. So I know that we will continue in that path forward and appreciate your input.
Thank the gentlelady. Mr. Higgins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to thank my colleagues and veteran brothers, Eli and Corey, for being here today. You have my commitment, each of you, to have candid and private conversations as we continue our investigations. I especially want to meet with you regarding your trajectory studies. I've conducted my own and found that some of the digital recreations for trajectory data doesn't include some of the pretty extreme terrain variances of elevation versus depression of the AGR complex versus the actual stage area. So I'm looking forward to working with you both on that. Let's try to come to a conclusion that we can say, okay, this is what the complete truth is, because we must investigate every potential theory. I don't consider anything to be a conspiracy theory. There are theories of what happened that day, and they all deserve complete, calm, thorough investigation. So you each have my commitment to work with you on that, and I know that this task force is committed to determining ultimately the same thing you gentlemen are, which is a complete and full reveal of truth to the American people. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank my colleagues for being here today.
Thank you, sir. So I want to thank both of you for being here. You know, some of the things you pointed out, the one thing that this task force does have, the subpoena power, and when you talk about people slow walking you and people not answering questions completely, that's our job to say, you know what, I understand you don't want to answer that question, but I want you to understand that we are going to be sure that you answer that question. The American people deserve to know the truth. I keep hearing they're not strong enough to stand it. They are strong enough to stand it, and if not now, when? I believe we are at a very dangerous time. A very, very dangerous time, and we have our eyes closed and our ears plugged saying, no, that's not happening. It is happening, and it's very dangerous. I want to thank both of you for your expertise. I want to thank both of you for your courage to come forward and bring that information out. I also want to thank the task force that has been working tirelessly and will continue to work tirelessly until we get to the end. But when we get to the end, it will be a finished piece of work, one that is complete in every way, that we will have exhausted everything we can do to get to the truth and make sure that the American people have the faith, the trust, and the confidence that they need to have in our agencies. Thank you both for being here, and without objection, the committee is adjourned.